everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of the So Mindful podcast. I am delighted to have with me this week Jenny Rushmore of Cashmerette. So she describes herself as a curvy sewist, normally based in Boston, Massachusetts, but at the moment she's living in the Cotswolds. Slight change of venue there. She discovered sewing at the age of 30 and became obsessed with the possibilities that it created for her. She loves the aspects of fitting clothes for her particular body. And she noticed that by being able to create her own wardrobe, it transformed not only what she was wearing, but also her confidence. As a result, she set up the Curvy Sewing Collective to share her inspirations. And I've mentioned Curvy Sewing Collective in a few of the previous podcasts. I absolutely love it. I love the reviews and everything that the community that's created. And I really refer to it regularly for any tips on patterns and just to see what people have made and how they've made it. She also set up Cashmerette Patterns, which celebrates curves and confidence and limitless style. It's created by a plus size seamstress with sewing patterns that are made exclusively up until recently for the 12 to 28 size range, but I know you're looking to expand that, but mostly for bigger bust sizes, so from sizes C to H. They believe that in changing the clothes, and we are changing the mindsets rather than being told how we should change our bodies to fit the clothes that are available. And that's something that I'm really passionate about as well. They believe in the notion that beauty can be measured in numbers is way past its expiration date. And the designs that she's putting together and the people that are using those patterns are definitely proof of that. Just some amazing inspiration and some beautiful garments that have been created. So I'm going to let Jenny introduce herself in her own words. So welcome, Jenny, and it's great to have you on the podcast.
Thanks very much, Jackie. Thanks for having me on. That was a lovely introduction. It probably covered most of the things about me. But yeah, I'm Jenny Rushmore. I'm 40. I'm a mum of one, currently living in the UK, usually in Boston, where I've lived for 14 years, something like that, quite a long time now. So I have a slightly mid-Atlantic accent. Yeah, and as you mentioned, I run Cashmerette Patterns. That is my full-time job.
Yeah, and it's an amazing range. And how long has that been running? How long has Cashmerette been running?
Almost exactly 5 years.
Oh, wow. Okay. Well, you've certainly done a lot in that time. So for anybody that's not familiar with Cashmerette, well, let's start with, how did you start making your own clothes? How did you get into dressmaking? Because you started relatively late, I would say, kind of starting in your 30s, didn't you, really?
Yeah, so I started sewing in 2010 when I had just turned 30. And basically I'd always done creative things, like painting and photography and arts things generally. And I wanted a new hobby. So I kind of went down my list and I was like, okay, sewing, I'll give that a go. So I did my first sewing lesson, or my first little sewing class, which honestly speaking was not that great. But I immediately was like, oh, there's something to this. This is very interesting. And like a lot of people, I got really obsessively into it, like very, very quickly. I think a lot of people go through this like really intense period at the beginning. So, I was really delving into like blogs because they were huge at the time. Like sewing blogs around 2010 was like really at a peak. And, mostly self-taught then. I did a couple of classes at Gather here in Cambridge and they were great. Cambridge, Massachusetts, not Cambridge in Norfolk. Oh, Suffolk. And yeah, that's basically how I started. Same as most people. I made a pillowcase, I made a cushion, and the first clothes I made was a wrap skirt, although it didn't really fit me. But
yeah, a common tale, I think. The first clothes are quite difficult, aren't they, to get you to get to fit. So how did you make that transition from just making your own clothes to deciding, actually, now I'm going to go out and design a full fabulous range of patterns? It's quite a leap.
Yeah, I never would have believed you. I sort of joke about this when I was turned 40 a couple of months ago, and I was like, if you told me at 29 what my life would be now, I would have been like, that's literally impossible. I've never sewn a thing in my life. That certainly wouldn't be my job. And I had a corporate marketing job. I quite liked it. It was quite good. So basically, yeah, I started sewing. I got really, really into it. And I set up a blog, mostly so that my friends and family could follow along with, what I was doing. Never expected many people to read it. And over time, actually, I did get, more and more readers. And what started becoming really apparent is that there weren't very many curvy or plus size or simply like, not size 8 people who were regularly blogging about in sewing. And, obviously there are some things that can be a little bit different. For instance, like having to adjust patterns quite a lot. And so more and more, I had people showing interest. So then the sort of like half step to getting to Cashmerette is that Colette, who at the time were like very much like the number one people in indie sewing patterns, decided to launch into plus sizes. So I approached them and said to them, like, hey, this is huge. Like, would you like me sort of get some people together and we'll promote it, like some of the curvy sewing bloggers. So I did that. It was mostly me and Mary Danielson Perry of the blog Idle Fancy at the beginning. We were like, we'll arrange it, we'll pull people in. And that went really, really well. And, Colette told us that like they sold tons and like everyone really appreciated seeing like women who are more around like the average size, which is, like a UK 16, 18-ish. Yeah. And at the end of it, the six of us, I think there were six, we were having a chat and we were like, it seems a shame to leave it here. Like we've had such a great response. So we decided we'd set up the Curvy Sewing Collective, which was a website, the first website that was actually dedicated to curvy and plus size sewing. There was nowhere before that where you could go and find a list of patterns and what sizes they went in, or where you could go and you knew you would find like high quality tutorials, or just look at lots of women who look like you and see pattern reviews of like, well, this pattern might go in a bigger size, but has it been done in a good way?
Yeah.
That was immediately a huge success. We had 10,000 people go to our site on the first day, which is insane given that
fantastic, yeah.
No Google SEO on it or anything at that point. And really from that point, I just kept on thinking, this is crazy. Like the average American woman is like a size 16, an American 16, and has a D cup. And in the UK, it's about a UK size 16, so slightly smaller, but the same number, and a double D. And yet almost all indie patterns, like if you're lucky, they reach that. So if there's a curve like this, they're going from the smallest bit to the middle. And that's it. They're not going beyond the middle. They're treating the middle people like they're the extreme largest. That makes no sense. And in addition, at the time, almost all sewing patterns were designed for a B cup bust. And now I have an H. And we actually now know from research we did on the Curvy Sewing Collective that more plus size women wear an H than a B cup bra. Like literally more. H is pretty big.
Yeah.
So I kept on thinking like, someone should do something about this. Like there's obviously sewers who are bigger, both in terms of like clothes size and in boobs. But I kept on thinking, well, I guess I hope someone does it. That would be nice, like for me. And then one day I basically had this thought, and it was, if you run a restaurant, you don't have to be a chef, right? If you have a great idea for a restaurant, you can have the idea, and then you get the building and you hire a chef and you work with them on the idea, and then you manage it as a business. And I have tons of business background and marketing background, very like corporate professional background in that. And all of a sudden I was like, oh, I don't actually need to know how to draft patterns, because I still don't. To be able to do this, I just need to hire someone who does. And in fact, we would get a better quality product. And then, it basically went from there. So that was in fall of 2014, autumn 2014, I sort of had the idea. And exactly a year later, we launched the first pattern, which was the Appleton wrap dress, which is actually still one of our most successful patterns.
Yeah, and it's a brilliant design, and just really flattering, I think, for all those kind of shapes. I think it's just lovely, isn't it? Which is, as you say, testament to why it's so successful. Fantastic. So I'm kind of blown away by that progress in such a short space of time as well. And I think having that insight that you don't have to be the expert, you can get somebody in who can do that, but you understand the need in the market and you are part of the market. I think that also helps, is that you can kind of apply your own knowledge, can't you, to what you want and what's not working for you. And I think it is really interesting, the data that you're gathering in terms of doing the development for the patterns, that, as you say, H sizes are more popular than a B cup, in a plus size. Yeah. And I think even at lower sizes, but even from teaching dressmaking, I don't come across many people that actually have a B cup. It's kind of in the extreme, the other end. There's fewer people. So yeah, so fantastic. And so what's been the most valuable lesson that you've kind of learned on that journey from going from sewing your own clothes to setting up the business and now developing the patterns?
Well, that's an interesting question. I mean, I think that there's, there's personal ones and then probably like business ones as well, right? So maybe if I start with the business first. I used to work for 11 years for Procter and Gamble, like huge multinational consumer products company. And their whole motto was, well, I shouldn't say motto, their whole thinking was, if you can identify a group of people and that they have an unmet need and no one's meeting it, and if you can figure out how to meet that need, like you basically will be successful by definition. And really, I worked there for so long, it was in my brain. And so I think, Cashmerette kind of proved that true, right? Like there was this really obvious gap in the market. It was for a pretty big group of people. And as you say, I'm plus size myself. So I have a very deep understanding of like 40 years of the struggles of finding clothes, how things fit, how things don't fit. And it's funny because if you take one of our pattern pieces and you compare it, and let's just say you take something that's generic, like our t-shirt, and you take someone else's t-shirt, the pieces look totally different.
They do, yeah.
And my drafter at the beginning actually kept on saying to me like, oh, this isn't really right. Like, this isn't how it's meant to look. And I said, look at it on me. And especially like, this is not a Cashmerette thing, by the way, but like, especially like this area here would be super flat. And she'd be like, but that's not the shape. We're taught. And I'm like, well, I think we've understood something here, right? About why things often don't fit plus size people, because that's the shape that's actually fitting people's bodies. So maybe they, update that learning. And, I knew that, for instance, like, so many people have forward shoulders, right? It's almost unusual not to have forward shoulders. You're like, unless you're like a ballerina or you're like a really upright person, but most of us have forward shoulders, especially if you've got big boobs, because it also kind of pulls you down. Huge numbers of people have a sway back and have issues with pulling in their back. Most plus size women have high waists and indeed have tilted waists where your waist is a bit lower in the front and higher in the back. So there are all these things that are like typical. So to me, I was like, well, instead of designing my pattern for like this ideal, I'm doing inverted commas here, ideal person who's plus size, who doesn't exist. Like, how you see occasionally plus size models and you're like, you look like Barbie, but just in a size 20, which beautiful, but it's incredibly rare to have a totally flat stomach and like look exactly like that when you're plus size. So I was like, I don't want to do that and then make everyone adjust. I'm just going to create something for what the average plus size woman looks like, which is that she has these various curves. And I mean, if there's one thing when you look at our pattern pieces, they are so much more curved than anyone else. We have very few straight lines because there are very few straight lines on our bodies. So I think there was, for me, a sort of validation of that idea that if you can find something that like no one else is really doing particularly well or not even meeting at all, there's a business idea in that. And I think personally, I mean, it's been quite radical for me, actually. It's sort of funny. I definitely have bad body image days, right? Like I just won't pretend that. And there are days when in my head, I think, well, if I ate less food, would I look like that person? Like I'll have these fleeting thoughts. But I can tell you that I am radically different than I was like 10 years ago in my head, like radically different. Like, first of all, when you don't have to go to shops and ask them, excuse me, do you have a size 18? Excuse me, do you have to have a 20? And then trying to get things on and nothing fits your boobs. And then the only thing you find that fits your boobs, you don't really like, but you're like, well, I'll buy it because what else am I going to
Yeah.
It's kind of soul destroying. And on a practical level, it's very annoying, but also just like, it's so hard when everyone's constantly being told, I mean, it's terrible in the UK as well, that like, it's like immoral to be fat, right? And it's your duty to try and be a smaller person. You just feel like, well, I don't deserve nice clothes. And then when you don't look good, you don't feel good about yourself. So it's sort of also ironic. Like if you want to change your body, you're actually better off like feeling more positive about yourself because you're more likely to be able to do it. So, I didn't really want to be in photographs. I very much felt like I was always the largest person in the room. That was my perception. Like I'm always the biggest person. I would look at pictures of myself and I would like wince a bit. And it's so funny. Like I had one, how different it is. I had one like aha thing I think it was last year, there was a Scottish newspaper did some article about, I can't remember what it was, like Scottish influencers or something like that, which is kind of funny because you can hear my accent, right? I may have grown up in Scotland, but I am not Scottish. But fine. And they did a full page, like page 4 or something, photo of me in a swimming costume, right? Like in Mexico, picture of me in a swimming costume. And I was like, oh yeah, cool, you know, that's nice. Good advertising for Cashmerette.
Yeah.
And the next day I was like, wait a second. If someone had posted a picture of me in a swimming costume in a national newspaper a couple of years ago, I would have cried for a week, you know? And the funny thing is, even that exact photo, I probably would have been upset about. It's not like I'm somehow look better in photos now. And I was like, wow, that is a huge change. That is a huge change in how I feel about myself. That now I look at that picture and I think, oh, I look happy. And that's a nice swimming costume. And that fits me well.
Mm.
And I don't like niggle, and I don't think like, well, look at that bit of my body or look at that bit of my body. And I think that's thanks to sewing. I really do. I
Yeah.
think it's sewing and sort of immersing myself in the plus size community, being constantly surrounded by women looking awesome. And at the
Yeah.
end of the day, look, lots of my customers are much bigger than me and they make outfits and look amazing. So who am I to say, oh, I can't look good at whatever, a size 18? Like it's tangibly not true. Like I see women who are 32 looking absolutely fabulous. So
Yeah.
it's really, you know, it's changed my perspective a lot.
Yeah. And I think that's really important, the exposure to real women. You know, I think that we're so bombarded with images that aren't that you kind of think, oh well, if I'm not conforming to what I'm seeing on the TV or in the press or any of those kind of things, that I'm somehow not right or not the right person. But
I
you
think,
know, like you say, I love the images. I love the patterns and the styles and the designs that people share on all those platforms, and your own blog and the collective, as well as I think I'm part of I follow Curvy Fashionista and some of those others, and just some amazing outfits. I mean, just absolutely gorgeous.
yeah.
But it's great to see real people and real bodies, and you know, kind of yeah, I'm totally with that. But I think more exposure is needed. I think that needs to become the norm, you know. That definitely needs to change. So yeah, fabulous, and great that you are able to see that transformation as well, because that will help, and share that definitely will help others think, you know, it doesn't have to stay like it is. If that's how they're feeling now, that doesn't have to be how it always is. Yeah, fabulous. So I'm going to skip ahead because I gave you some questions that I was going to ask you, but I think the pattern drafting one's really interesting. And I learned pattern drafting at night school, or the equivalent of night school. And I went back to college a couple of years ago, and pattern drafting was part of the course for the fashion diploma that I was doing there. And one thing that struck me, which I kind of mentioned when we were in contact before the podcast, was that I was really interested that they are still teaching the methods for pattern drafting that are from the kind of 1950s, I would suggest. And there is and those rules don't work on, you know, on our body shapes. You mentioned earlier about having forward shoulder or a sway back, and they're adjustments that I make on all my patterns, because I think, having had careers wherever you've sat in front of a computer, or you know, just our lifestyles these days don't lend themselves to sitting with a, you know, upright posture. And so now you're designing those into the patterns, is that right? You're kind of building those into your designs.
Yeah, I mean, it's not, and you know, it's not to say that no one has to do more alterations. Obviously, you know, like I've explained this many times, but like, just because you're an 18, like put 3 18 people next to each other, they can look radically different, right?
Yeah.
Like even with measurements, that's something which I think sometimes people don't fully get their head around. They think, well, I'm an H cup, but this pattern comes in 48 inches and that's what I am, so I'm okay. And what people, it takes them a while sometimes to understand is, you could have a big torso with A cup boobs on the front and be 48 inches, or you could have a significantly smaller torso with really big boobs on the front and also be 48 inches. And things will not fit the same. Like that does not need like the same pattern. I mean, I think one of the big things, I mean, again, I have never even learned pattern drafting, and I have certainly never done like fashion school or anything. But sort of reading between the lines when I speak with our drafters and so on, first of all, I think a lot of fashion school is like designing on mannequins, right? And at the end of the
Yeah.
day, mannequins don't look like real people. They just don't.
And
Right?
croquis that are 9 heads long and all that kind of stuff, really tall. And yeah.
But even with like the mannequins, it's like there isn't a mannequin, as far as I'm aware, with like a forward shoulder. We use Alvanon. We are very expensive, and they're a bit better in the plus size, but they're still not great, honestly. Like it doesn't. They look like a plus size model, right? Like that's the kind
like
of,
you mentioned the Barbies, yeah.
yeah. But like it still looks very, in inverted commas, perfect.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have like, it has a soft tummy, but like it doesn't look like my tummy, that's for sure. So I think there's a lot of drafting for these mannequins, and that doesn't reflect things. And then also the idea of pattern alterations is almost uniquely home sewing, right? Like in industrial sewing and ready to wear, there is no such thing as pattern adjustments. Fashion designers are not taught FBAs, right? That's not a thing. Like a lot of industrial pattern drafters who come to home sewing are like taken aback and confused by all of these adjustments people are making, because what they're being taught to do is make a decent average to meet those people's needs. But home sewists is like a totally different level. So in many ways, we're often actually much more skilled at fitting patterns than professionals are, because we just know all of these things. And also it's even changed over time, because I have a lot of older customers, like 60s, 70s, 80s plus, and many of them will say, first of all, that our patterns are the first ones that have ever fit them, but also that they'd never heard of a full bust adjustment before, for instance, they read our blog, because in inverted commas, in the olden days, right, they didn't teach it. Like, I don't know whether it hadn't been invented or whether people just didn't discuss it, but it was like, either you fit it out of the packet or you don't. And in fact, even now, and this blows my mind, but even now in some big four patterns, it will say, do not grade between sizes on the tissue. It actually says it is not appropriate to grade between sizes. Well, that blows my mind. Like 80% of women have to grade between sizes. Why would you tell people that? That makes no sense. But that's the kind of thing. Like if you grew up with that and you had a traditional sewing teacher and she's reading that and she's like, well, they tell you not to do it.
Yeah.
Then you're going to run into a lot of problems fitting patterns to your body.
Yeah, definitely. And I just think it's just such a shame. It's a lost opportunity to not be skilling the people, because it does affect the design and it does affect how it's made and it does affect some of your decisions. And you referred to it earlier in terms of blending the features of the body into the style of the pattern, so having more curves in the design as well as in the pattern itself, kind of following the lines of the body and flattering those in that way. And I think that's really important. And I was really sad to see that they weren't including any of that they weren't even considering that as a thing at college or in some of the classes. And so I think that's one of the things where again, talking about meeting the needs and things like that, I think there is an opportunity to consider of how we can pass on the skills of drafting for real people, for a bigger audience, because ideally we want more people making patterns that fit real people, don't we? That would be perfect, because I think even the big four pattern companies are still designing patterns with a perfect upright 5'7", size 12 in mind, aren't they? They're not really catering.
Well, and then they also assume that if you're a size 26 that you still have B-cut boobs, but you just have like really big shoulders and long arms.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, it is. Yeah, very much so. So
you hear a lot of there's been quite a lot of chat sort of saying like it's much harder to draft for plus sizes, and I do think that's it's sort of slightly backward notion, because I think when people say it's harder, what they mean is they don't know how to do it.
Yeah, there aren't any rules defined at the moment. Yeah.
They've never learned how to do it, and potentially they're struggling to find someone to teach them. Well, first of all, it's clearly not impossible, or Cashmerette wouldn't exist. Like, it is possible, and there are people who do it. I mean, again, I don't draft our stuff. I use commercial people who are available to work for others brands if necessary. But it's also funny because, and we'll get onto this in a second, but we're expanding down right now. To me, that's quite hard. Like, it's confusing to me, like what a size 4 body looks like. I find that difficult, and we're working on it. But it just goes to show it's just because I haven't done it before. It's not because size 4 bodies are intrinsically harder to design for. It's simply a matter of like what you're familiar with.
Yeah, and I think the exposure to more people gives you that understanding of what the common features are and what are less common features that are particular to individuals, like you were saying earlier, around the distribution of where your inches are, whether it's at the front or across the back or at the side, or wherever that might be. There'll be some groups of people that follow similar traits, won't there, that you can kind of cater for more easily. Definitely. So are there any common mistakes in terms of when people are making or using your patterns? Are there any common mistakes that you see people making, or that they come to you with, or questions and things like that?
Well, the number one thing people come to us with is asking what size to make. And because we were one of the first people to have cup sizes up to an H, a lot of people got a bit stumped by that. So we did two things to kind of make it clearer. Although we have very good customer service. So if anyone ever emails us, like, we'll just help you out directly. But we've done two things. So the first thing is we added a high bust measurement to our body measurement table. Yeah. So what that means basically is we're telling you this is exactly how to pick your cup size. And for the vast majority of people, most of the time that works. There are some exceptions, I will say. The one challenge with high bust is if you have very high boobs, or you wear a bra that sort of gives you a lot of fullness at the top, it sort of artificially inflates your high bust number. So there are some women with really big boobs where the high to full bust isn't that huge, but the full to under bust is significant. So you always, as with all things sewing, you need to like critically think about what you're doing there. So you're like, oh, if this put me in a CD, but I'm a J cup, but I have really high full boobs, probably I'm not in the CD, right? I'm probably in the GH instead.
Yeah.
And then the second thing that we just launched fairly recently is a size calculator. So if you go to cashmerette.com/sizing, we actually have a calculator where you put your high bust, full bust, waist, and hip in. And out it will come with a recommendation for what size to make. And then it links actually to the second thing people most commonly don't do. So we tell you if you need to grade between sizes. So we'll say, for instance, you're a 20 GH graded to a 22 waist, graded to a 24 hip. We'll also tell you if you need an FBA or you need a small bust adjustment, and if so, by how much. So we might tell you you're a 16 GH with a 1 inch full bust adjustment and a blah, blah, blah. And so a lot of people, when they're starting out, don't know about grading between sizes. And I actually always say, like, it's so funny because once you've been sewing for a long time, like that bit seems like a basic no-brainer, right? Like that's such an obvious thing.
You just do that, yeah.
It's not obvious at all. Like you've never gone in a shop and asked for an 18 graded to a 22. But most of us, in fact, we found 80% of people in our survey grade between sizes. So almost everyone does. Yeah. And it immediately can like improve the fit of your clothes over ready to wear, like, triple. So our sizing calculator is also introducing some people even to that idea, because we've had people get, say, I don't know, 22 to a 26 to a 22. And they say, oh, I've just been making a 26 because I just picked the biggest number.
Yeah.
And then made that size so it would fit me. But that's exactly where you end up with the same problem you get in ready to wear.
Yeah.
Where like if I get something that fits my boobs, it'll be a 10 everywhere else.
It's big on your shoulders.
Yeah. The rest of me, it won't fit my boobs. Yeah. So we've had people sort of like, some of them have like posted their results on social media and they're like, oh my goodness, my mind is blown. Like I didn't realize, like what combo I was in. And we've had many, many people already tell us that they've tried out the new size, the sizing calculators suggested, and they're like, oh, suddenly it fits really well. So I think that, to be honest, like getting the right size. I also quite commonly see people who, and it's unfortunate, but like they'll pick a size to start with, which in retrospect, I'll see is the wrong size that they started with, but they never asked. They just sort of said, okay, I'm doing that one. And then they'll post on our Facebook community and they'll be like, okay, I'm 5 muslins in, I've made 16 adjustments, like la, 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 la. And I'll see it and I'll be like, oh, instead, you're not actually the 16 CD, you're actually a 12 GH. And they make that and then it fits. Yeah. And so that's why it's so important to get the right size at the beginning, because otherwise you can go down this rabbit hole of fitting where you think that everything's a fit adjustment, when in fact you just made the wrong size at the very beginning.
Yeah.
So I think that's another one. And look, that's hard. Like if you're new to sewing, like how do you know? But at least for Cashmerette, like go and validate it in our size calculator to begin with, to
Yeah.
make sure you're starting in the right place. And then, you know, you can ask it. We have a Facebook community group, like a closed one that you can apply to be in. And it's super helpful. People are helping each other all the time. And as I said, like you can always email us at hello@cashmerette.com. And every day we look at photos and advise people of like what changes to make.
Yeah, and it is really important. I think I've been making clothes for a long time, but I've only recently, probably the last 5 years, really focused on fitting. And even just the order in which you fit things, I think people don't realize. So they'll make something, and we were just doing one recently with my mom, and we thought that it wasn't fitting around the back or the sides, but actually when we released the side seams, it was the shoulders that were wrong in the first place. And when we fixed that, everything else was actually okay. You know, it was kind of just going back to the basics of start at the top and work your way down. And so yeah, so getting that whole top section right to start with, and if you start, as you say, with the wrong pattern, then it's going to make it 10 times harder to get back to the right one. Fab. So so you clearly make your own clothes as well, and I've seen you doing, how's it going with the blazer, by the way, because I've been watching the progress with the new blazer pattern.
Yeah, it's going well. It's taken a really long time for like numerous reasons, not least that it takes a really long time to make a blazer muslin, so you can't like whip through 3 in a day. And I'm thousands of miles away from the whole team now, so that makes it a lot slower. But it's good. We got to a point where we're ready to test. And actually, you know, as you've seen, we've actually been sharing how we're developing the blazer, because we thought it would be a really cool opportunity to sort of show people behind the scenes.
Yeah.
Occasionally people will be like, why are your patterns the price they are? And I want to be a bit like, read this series and you will see how many people are involved and how many people we pay and how long it takes to make a really good quality pattern, right? Like I could make something and launch it in a month if I wanted to easily, but it wouldn't be the quality that, you know, we expect. But it's going well. We reached a point with the muslin where we feel like it's good enough. And that sounds weird, right? You think it should be perfect, but actually not, because first of all, my body that we're testing on, the blazer on, is not a perfect size in Cashmerette anyway. Like I grade between sizes. And then what you're really going for is like an average, right? It could fit me absolutely perfectly. And I know how to do that, obviously, but that doesn't mean it would necessarily fit everyone else. And because right now I'm like a 20 GH with a 22-24 waist and 16 hips, I'm not representative, you know, like it wouldn't be great if it perfectly fit me.
Yeah.
So we reached a point where like, this seems good. So basically we're working on instructions now, and you can imagine like blazer instructions is like very
detailed. Yeah.
detailed. We've been working on like what pocket type we should have. The good news is, and I mentioned this I think publicly already, is that we were designing for a stretch woven, and what we've realized looking at the finished garment measurements is that it should be able to work for a woven too. And that's great, because that will hugely open up the possibilities, you know, for like tailoring or people who just don't want to stretch. So when we test, we're going to test both. We're going to have people like split them up, and some people will do stretch and some will do woven. And yeah, and then we'll see how it goes. I mean, the launch date of this has been moved back already at least 3 times. We have a tentative date in our calendar, and I have absolutely no idea if we will meet that date or not. But suffice it to say, it won't be this year. It will be hopefully early next year.
Yeah, and not to mention the challenges anyway of the current situation. I'm sure that's not helping either.
No,
on top of everything.
Yeah.
Fab. So in terms of making your own clothes, then what are your favorites? What are your favorite patterns, and what do you like to make?
Well, it's sort of funny. I think about this quite often. Like, there's what I wear the most often, and then there's what I like sewing, and then there's also what I have the time to sew, to which the answer is very little these days. But to be perfectly honest, I wear my Concord t-shirts more than anything else, right? Like I have 2 Concord t-shirts that I made with fabric from Emma One Sock a long time ago, and it's like I wear them like every single week, both of them, like constantly. They were made out of like a St. John, which, you know, the designer St. John, a remnant knit, and it's almost a ponte, but not quite. It's sort of like in between a jersey and a ponte. And oh my goodness, like those things, they're years old now, but I wear them all the time. So I find that kind of thing really helpful. In terms of what I enjoy sewing, I love sewing coats. and I haven't seen the coat in years. Oh, but I love it. And I have like a coating stash, which, you know, barely gets touched. But these days, mostly what I tend to do is I tend to make versions of what we're going to come out with for myself. Because, you know, that's sort of part of the development process. So we have something super exciting coming up, if everything goes well, next month, but we'll have to see, which is something we have been asked for like ever, so much that it's almost a joke among my friends. They'll be like, is everyone asking for that again? And I'll be like, yeah. So we're doing that thing. Everyone can guess what that is now. But I need to, I'm going to sew up a couple of versions myself. And, you know, it's sort of for fun. Is also sort of for work. And yeah, so I'd say those are my favorite things. I wish I had the time to sew a coat, but to be perfectly honest, that is not working part-time. It's not really on the agenda these days.
No, not at the moment. Fab. And so what's in the, so you mentioned about obviously your exciting announcement coming, and we touched on it briefly before around the kind of future for Cashmerette. So you mentioned about changing the size range, expanding the size range. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
So right now we're in the size range 12 to 32. We're in 32 in like most of our patterns now, and cup sizes C to H. And, you know, as I explained in the background of why I set up Cashmerette, you know, that was really important to me. I wanted first to go to this underserved market. I mean, a 12 isn't really plus size, you know, but like, you know, on the higher end, middle of the road and up. And in 2015, when I launched, there were practically no brands that did that, right? Like there were very few patterns that went up into a high number. Like I know Colette was doing it at that point, but there were very few others. And so one thing that's really amazing, and like I cannot obviously take all the credit, but I think partly due to Cashmerette and the Curvy Sewing Collective, is there's been a sea change in the number of sewing patterns that go up to into true plus sizes. And when I say true plus sizes, I mean like you need to be going to like 26, 28 plus. Like it's not plus size if you hit like a 20.
Yeah.
There have been so many, and that is great. And people sometimes do say to me like, oh, are you sad that you created all this competition for yourself? But I laugh. I'm like, no one worries about straight size competition. Do you know what I mean? No one's like, oh no, how's Tilly gonna cope that there's other straight size patterns? Like, no. And that's because we just think that straight size people like deserve to have a whole range of things offered to them because they're like considered the norm. So they have everything, and then you're plus size, so you get this corner over here that's like a bit different. But there's been so much change, and that's great because not everyone likes Cashmerette. That's fine, you know, we're not going to be everyone's style. Not all plus size women have big boobs, like many of them don't. So it's good that there's variety. But although there's been lots of change in that area, there has been almost no change in meeting the needs of smaller sewists with big boobs. And ever since we launched, we've had emails constantly, and a lot from people who are like size 8 and 10, like just below our size range. And they're like, I have H cup boobs, I have F cup boobs, and nothing fits me, and I have to do an FBA on everything. And, you know, it still remains the case that they can at least fit the rest of their body in many patterns and do an FBA, right? So like they do have a lot more available to them than if you're size 30. However, it's still really annoying to do an FBA, right? And we are the people who really understand like cup sizing and curves. So basically, you know, we were looking at like, what's the future of the company? Where are we going? What direction are we going to do? And we were like, you know what, let's do that. And, you know, we have helped loads and loads of brands expand their sizes up. So we're now going to expand our sizes down and include those people. And we have, you know, when we announced that we were planning on doing it, we had an amazing response. I mean, like unbelievable response, you know, including from people, so, you know, people would be like, my daughter's a size 0, but she has double D boobs. We can't get anything to fit her. Like, I'm so excited. So, yeah, so we're really excited about that. Now, to the point I was making earlier, it is surprisingly difficult to do because we're not used to it at all. And obviously, like, adding big boobs on the front of everything does it, you know, it's more complex than assuming like a flatter chest. So we are currently in the third 3.5, I would say, round of testing of one pattern, a historic one that we did. And I don't know that there might not be a 4th round. So like that's actually probably more testing than we've done on any pattern ever. But we really want to get it right, you know, and there are different proportions. We have a size 8 that we're using as like our core size. And then we're going to have overlapping sizes in 12, 14, and 16. So we're going to have 0 to 16 and then 12 to 32. And that's explicitly because of the grading between sizes question, because if someone's a 10 to a 14, they're out of luck if you separate the size ranges. So we're going to do that. Very few people, not saying nobody, but few people are like a 10 to an 18. But if they are, like, they can contact us. We'll sort them out with another pattern. It's not a problem. But that's what we're doing. So we're actually working on 3 of our historic patterns that we'll launch hopefully at the same time, like some of the most popular ones. And that'll be early next year. And then as of that point, all of our patterns will go into being the full size range.
Fantastic. And I think the designs are just so great. So it's entirely normal that people are envious of the trying to get them in those patterns. Fabulous. So if people want to find out more then, Jenny, what's the best way to reach you and connect with you?
Sure. So we're Cashmerette everywhere. So you can go to cashmerette.com is our website, where you can find our shop and our blog and the sizing calculator and tons of tutorials and how to contact us, and also our online workshops. On Instagram, we are Cashmerette. Same on Facebook. And as I mentioned before, we have the Cashmerette Pattern community group, and that's really, really, really popular. And we're also on Twitter and Pinterest and all that business, but mostly Facebook and Instagram is the best place to basically interact with our community. We're also sold in stockists around the world. So occasionally we'll get people saying, oh, you're American though, and like, we can't do that. Not a problem. We have tons of stockists in the UK, but also in different countries around the world. And also our patterns come in PDF and printed versions. So if you do want to like not pay postage, you can get a PDF, and we have guides on our website if you haven't used PDFs before on how to use them. And also there's loads of PDF printing companies now, which didn't exist a few years ago. And that's a game changer. So I'll tell you, while I'm here in the UK and doing development out of my house, I do not have access to a plotter, but I am also definitely not taping A4 sheets together like every day. So I've been using netprinter.co.uk, but there's also, and they're actually amazing, very fast service, but there's all kinds of services now. So if you want to actually buy a pattern, you can either come to us at cashmerette.com, buy a printed or a PDF one, or you can go to one of our stockists, and you can find a stockist list on our website as well.
Yeah, and I have to say the tutorials are great as well. So like we were talking about earlier, if you do have to make adjustments, you've really taken care of that. You've got really extensive information and instructions, haven't you, on the website for people who might need to do that.
We do, and we have an online workshop as well called Fitting for Curves. That's by far our like most popular workshop, and in that one, it's hours and hours long, and I basically take you through 16 of the most common pattern adjustments. And I think the big thing that people like the most is you actually see me in a muslin of the muslin that shows the problem. So we say, this is a muslin where I need an FBA. How can we tell? And I show you how. Then I do the adjustment, and then I show you when it fits again. And I think for a lot of people, like, that's the missing link. They're like, I know I need to do adjustments, but how do I know how? So that's been really popular. And yes, that's another thing to check out.
Yeah, fantastic. Great. Well, I appreciate you taking the time to share the story of Cashmerette and your journey. I think it's fascinating, and it'd be great to see how things pan out over the next few months with the new patterns and with the new size ranges. So thanks so much. I really appreciate it. It's been great, Jenny. Fabulous to talk to you, and no doubt I'll be in touch again in the future to see what's happening and what's going on.
Great. Thanks very much, Jackie. Bye.
Thank you.